Get started in about 30 seconds here. All right. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this session, New Insights, or New Year, New Results, New Insights for Leading High-Performing Teams. As we're getting started, let me just suggest a bit of housekeeping, a way that you guys could help us out today. Would you please do your best to keep yourself on mute? And we ask that because you've all been on the meetings where somebody's background noise begins to intrude on the conversation. So if you can all self-manage your mute button, that will sure help us out a lot. So again, I just want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us today for this session. If you've been part of our previous sessions, you know this is part of the Center's ongoing effort to make sure that our research and our resources are broadly available, and we're really glad you joined us today. And we especially hope that you find this content to be timely as we start a new year. New Year's, of course, always give us that chance to sort of start over or take a fresh look at how we're working. And as part of our work here at the Center for Values-Driven Leadership, we engage in research to really understand how exceptional leaders and companies work. What makes them tick? What is it about their cultures and systems and processes and approaches, their ways of communicating that makes them so successful? We do this original research inside these companies, and we also keep ourselves informed about the latest research from the world's top scholars. And today we want to bring you 5 insights drawn from current evidence-based research that we think you can put to work as soon as you get off this conference call. Jim and I believe without a doubt that these 5 insights are just a better way to work. And we think they'll lead you to better results this year. So, and we also want to note that they're all values driven. They're all things you can feel good about doing and know that you're engaging people in the process. So we're excited to get started with today's topic. But first, let's do just a little bit in terms of introductions. Jim, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody, and Happy New Year. I'm Jim Ludema, and I'm the Director of the Center for Values-Driven Leadership at Benedictine University, which is just outside Chicago in Lisle, Illinois. And I also am a professor. I teach in a PhD program in values-driven leadership and do a bunch of executive education. And this area of leading high-performing teams is one of my particular areas of expertise and one that I enjoy the most. I'm also married, have 3 kids. They're all married, and I have 4 grandkids and 1 on the way. So, hello. Great to be here with you today.
Thanks, Jim. And just to introduce myself, my name's Amber Johnson, and I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Center for Values-Driven Leadership. And that means I get to hear the challenges that business is having and see what kind of solutions scholarship might be able to offer, and then in turn take the ideas from business and put them into a scholarship context where we can test them out. I also happen to be a student in the PhD program Jim was talking about. In about 4 more months, I will go from being Amber Johnson to being Dr. Amber Johnson. So very much looking forward to that in this new year. While we're doing introductions, let me just say a brief word about the Center for Values-Driven Leadership at Benedictine as well. As you can see there on the screen, our mission is to help values-driven leaders develop themselves and others so you can build flourishing companies that transform business and society. And we do this through education, through research, and through our consulting practice. In terms of education, today's session is actually a great example of the executive education resources we make available to leaders around the world. And we also offer an executive PhD program in values-driven leadership for senior executives, like Jim just mentioned. Our program was named the #1 program in leadership by HR.com for the past 2 years in a row. And at the end of today's session, I'll share a couple of resources on how you could learn more about that program. We'll also tell you about some of the other executive education events we have coming up, including a 3-day workshop in February on how to lead collaborative change. But for now, I want to get us right into the topic at hand, which is leading high-performing teams. So Jim's going to dive in with a brief intro. Jim, take it away.
Thanks, Amber. Yeah, I want to just touch on three classic studies that really set the stage for the rest of what we're going to talk about today. And the first were the Hawthorne studies that were conducted in the 1920s in the Hawthorne plant of the Western Electric Company by Elton Mayo and Fritz Roethlisberger. I'm sure you're familiar with the Hawthorne effect. But the Hawthorne plant was a huge warehouse in which hundreds of people were assembling and wiring and soldering circuit boards for telephones as part of the Bell telephone system at the time. And one of the things that Mayo and Roethlisberger did was study the effect of lighting on work productivity. And they found that whether they turned the lights up or turned the lights down, people became more productive. And they were stunned by this finding. But as they studied it more, they discovered that productivity increased because of the attention given to the employees by the research team and by their managers. Low lights, bright lights, medium lights, it didn't matter. They performed at a higher level when their social, psychological, and emotional needs were met. And as I mentioned, this is what we call the Hawthorne effect. Up until then, all of the work on human productivity was done from the perspective of scientific management, made popular by Frederick Taylor. And the basic assumption there was that human emotions and interactions have no place at work. You put in a production system and expect people to adapt to the system and set aside their social and psychological needs. The Hawthorne experiments were the first to say, hey, wait a minute. There's something more going on here than just mechanical productivity. People aren't machines. There are social, psychological, and emotional factors at play. The second set of studies were those done by social psychologist Kurt Lewin in the 1940s and 50s. And in one study, he and his colleagues observed the meat-eating patterns of people in the U.S. during the Korean War. The U.S. government was trying to get homemakers to serve their families more liver and venison so that the beef, pork, and chicken could go to the military. And at first, they trained a number of homemakers individually and then sent them home to change their meat-eating behavior. But they found that there was very little change. They didn't get on board. So then they formed groups of homemakers and encouraged them to talk with one another about changing their meat-eating patterns, and they found a much higher success rate. And the key point here is that groups are superior vehicles for change because people can inquire together, make meaning together, give and receive feedback, and learn new ways of doing things, all in a context where they're getting their social, psychological, and emotional needs met. And then the third set of studies were those done by social psychologist Wilfred Bion during the Second World War, and he led therapy groups, what we call T groups, for soldiers who were experiencing what we now know as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And he observed that while the soldiers wanted to heal and get well, and they wanted to help each other heal and get well, they often engaged in behaviors that were exactly the opposite of what was needed, ways that were completely irrational from the standpoint of getting well. And they would act this way when they weren't getting their social, psychological, and emotional needs met by the group. And three patterns of behavior that you're probably very familiar with popped up. One was dependency behavior, where they would try to get their needs met by Bion, the therapist. Another was fight-flight behavior, where they would try to get their needs met by either arguing with other members of the group or sort of withdrawing from the group, fight-flight. And then the third was dependency, where they would try to form relationships with certain members of the group so that that thought like them, so that those people could meet their social, psychological, and emotional needs. But all of those things caused the group's performance to go down in terms of promoting the healing that they really needed. Amber will say more about this in just a minute, but Bion's key insight was that all human beings have a fundamental need for belonging and uniqueness. Belonging in the sense of being included, being accepted, and uniqueness in the sense of being able to be who I truly am, not have to conform to some outside standard. And when we feel like we do not belong or we cannot be our unique selves, we engage in behavior, consciously or unconsciously, that undermines the effectiveness of the group. So as it relates to you as leaders and you as team members, the key insight is that you can't just throw your best and brightest into a room and give them a task and expect them to achieve high performance. You have to pay attention to process. You need to create and maintain a container in which everybody's social, psychological, and emotional needs are met, as well as the task needs at hand. In fact, the task needs will be met better if the social, psychological, and emotional needs are also taken care of. Then the energy will be freed up to achieve peak performance. And that's what we're going to focus on today, the 5 things that you need to pay attention to make sure that the social, psychological, and emotional needs of your team members are met and that they are achieving peak performance. So here are the 5 things that we're going to talk about. Number 1, building psychological safety. That is foundational to any high-performing team. Number 2, defining clear purpose, goals, and performance standards. Number 3, leveraging strengths of the team members and the team as a whole. Number 4, developing team members and helping them to grow and thrive and succeed. And then number 5, sharing leadership. So to get us started on that first one, psychological safety, I'll turn it back over to you, Amber.
Great. So like Jim said, the first insight we want to share with you of evidence-based research for high-performing teams is that you have to start by building psychological safety. And for those of you that were in our first session back in the fall, you may remember that we talked briefly about psych safety back then. And that's because we really do think it's a foundational concept, and so we want to dig into it a little deeper today. Psych safety is the shared belief that a team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. The shared belief that a team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. And I want you to notice 2 things about that definition. First, that it's a shared belief. And what we mean by that is it is only true that your team has psychological safety if every member of the team feels that it is true. If you as the leader believe you have psychological safety, but no one else feels safe, or even 1 or 2 people don't feel safe, then psychological safety doesn't truly exist in your team. So the first thing we need to observe is that it's a shared belief. The second thing we want to observe is it's about safety for interpersonal risk-taking. The leading scholar on this topic is our colleague Amy Edmondson of Harvard Business School. And she says psychological safety is knowing that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up. Knowing you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up. And I don't think it takes an MBA or a mastermind to really imagine why that could be important to a high-performing team. Just imagine what incredible opportunities are lost if our team members feel like they can't really share their concerns or bring their best ideas to the table. I mentioned earlier that I'm a doctoral student, and in my own research, I've studied a company that for years taught their mid-level managers that they were doers, not thinkers. That was an exact phrase that one general manager would say over and over and over. Be a doer, not a thinker. And I interviewed a lot of their managers, and they told me story after story about how they came into the company with all of these ideas. They were so excited to put into action. They saw the company's potential. They saw areas that they could fix and improve things and new products they could develop. But every time they raised an idea, they'd be told that you're a doer, not a thinker. And after a few years of that, they stopped trying. They would stop raising their hands or suggesting new ways to work. Because anytime that they did, they'd just be told, that won't work around here, or that's not how we do it, or very simply, I didn't pay you to think, which is remarkable, right?
Wow.
So many years later, fast forward, and many years later, the firm has a new CEO and new senior leaders, and it's a new day. They want the company to be more entrepreneurial. But the challenge is they've created this place where it's not safe to be entrepreneurial. They don't feel it. Nobody feels like they'll be heard. And so it took years to change that culture. It took a lot more leadership changes for people to finally believe that it could be psychologically safe for them to speak up. I'm happy to report that a few years on, changing and the ideas are coming to the forefront. More good ideas are emerging. But you can see from that why psychological safety is so important, because because we don't work in these homogenous organizations where we all have the same ideas. Most of us work in places where we don't look like the person working next to us. We don't think like them. We come from different professional backgrounds, different personal backgrounds. We have different experiences and ideas and preferences, and we actually need all of that in business. But if we don't create a place where it's safe for that differentiation to emerge, then we are lacking psychological safety and will miss out a tremendous amount along the way. Jim mentioned earlier that in the midst of this, there's a fundamental truth that is emerging and that we find truly successful teams have mastered. And it's this simple truth, that being on a team is a constant quest for belonging and individuation. People are continually wanting to feel like they belong, that they are part of the team, they are welcomed there, they're a member of, invited to the table and one among equals. But also at the same time, like their individuality, their uniqueness is respected and valued and considered and is a necessary part of the team, that they are fully welcome in their workspace. You can see how that's connected to interpersonal relationships and also to that idea of psychological safety. Ron Fry, one of the world's leading scholars on team development and a colleague from ours from Case Western University, reminds us of another related truth, and that is that often, if you've got somebody in your organization who's a really loud complainer, anybody on any team who's a really loud complainer, often what they're really expressing is the greatest need for belonging. I can think of one person I've worked with, not now, but in a previous career, and I'll call him, it's an important distinction, right, Jim? I'm going to call him Ray. And Ray could spend 8 hours a day telling me what was wrong with the organization. Perhaps you've worked with somebody like him. He was a really loud complainer, and he seemed to only produce complaints. That was really his role, it felt like. But when I actually stopped to look more closely at what was going on with Ray, it was clear that he was complaining because he didn't feel like he belonged. He didn't really feel safe in the organization. He felt like an outsider. And he wasn't sure that if he raised his hand to share his true thoughts or if he really contributed, that it would be welcome. And so he acted out by complaining instead of being productive. If you have a stormtrooper in your office, like we have that little duck on the screen, it might be that they're really asking, do I belong here? Am I really part of the team? In high-performing teams, we find psychological safety, and in that place of safety, they find a way to navigate that tension between belonging and individuation. So the idea of belonging and individuation comes from the researcher Jim mentioned earlier, Bion, and also from Brewer, who's a prominent American social psychologist. And you can map out their thinking like this. I want you to look in that top right corner where you see high performance. When we have high individuation and high belonging, we get high performance. Individuals feel accepted for who they are, and they feel like in their uniqueness, they can contribute. And then you can see what happens in the other quadrants when you're low in one of the areas or in both of the areas. You get patchy performance. You get performance that's muted because people don't feel like they can bring their full selves to the table. So how do you get psychological safety and make both belonging and individuation possible in your team? As a leader, it's really your responsibility, and it's partly about how you show up at work. So we want to introduce you to some compelling research about leadership. And here on the screen, you see a list of characteristics of leaders. I want you to think about the characteristics you admire most in a leader, the characteristics you think are really important. So the characteristics you most admire of the leader. And of the options you see here on the screen, I want you to select four characteristics you think are most important for being a leader. I'm actually going to pause and give you a minute to do this so you can think about it. Read through the characteristics, identify the 4 you think are most important to leaders, that you admire most in leaders, and write those down on a piece of paper. And then if you'd like, you're welcome to share those in our chat box as well. So you have a minute to do this. Got about 30 more seconds to identify your top 4 characteristics, the characteristics you most admire. And if you finish early, take a second to make sure you're still muted. All right. Everyone have their 4 characteristics they most admire in a leader. Like I said, you're welcome to share those with everyone using the chat function, but let me tell you where this list comes from. This list comes from the research of Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner. And for the last 30 years, they have asked over 3 million people all over the world to look at the same list and pick out the characteristics they find to be most important in a leader. And what they have found is that no matter where you live in the world, there are certain characteristics that emerge as the most important on average. The characteristics that are most admired in leadership are these 4: honest, competent, inspiring, and forward-looking. Let me say those again. You may want to even write them down. Honest, competent, inspiring, and forward-looking. I see someone's shared theirs, and they have at least one in common. That's pretty usual. Jim and I did this yesterday with a group of people from Uruguay and Argentina and Mexico, and almost all of them selected at least one of these 4, if not more. Here's the numbers to show you how it holds consistent. So we're looking at data from 1987, 2002, and 2017, and you can see that those 4, honest, competent, inspiring, and forward-looking, emerge as the top 4 across the global sample. And I included then the 5th one, which is intelligence. And you can see that there's about a 20-point difference between it and the ones above it in any given year. It's just very clear that it's these 4 things people most want in their leaders. And here's what's fascinating to me about this data, that these 4 hold true across the following countries: the United States, China, Japan, Mexico, Scandinavia, Turkey, and the UAE. So think about that for a second. Such incredibly different cultures, Mexico, Japan, the UAE, very different places, and yet what we want in a leader is all the same. So take a second and think about the leaders you most admire, the people that you've worked with and known well that really impress you. I wonder if it's true. I bet you can say these things about them. I'm sure you can. And here's another thing. Kouzes and Posner say that when you have honest and competence and inspiration and forward-looking, what you get is credibility. Credibility means you have both competence and character, and we think it's an important part of psychological safety. The big message is that when you as a leader are honest, and when the other members of your team are honest, and when you as a leader are competent, and the other members of your team are competent, you create this culture of reliability, of credibility, a culture of trustworthiness, where you can trust each other's motives, you can trust that people will do what they say they're going to do, and that is really at the heart of psychological safety. When that's all happening in sync, it actually leads to incredible performance. And here's one illustration, a data point of that. This is some data that comes from research Google did with their own sales teams. And you can see they looked at performance to goal. And they found that in the teams that have the highest levels of psychological safety, they overshot their goals by 17%, while the teams that were the lowest in psychological safety underperformed by 19%. That is a compelling difference that shows what it takes to be a high-performing team. So why do you think psychological safety made that much of a difference in team performance? Jim's going to help us answer that question.
Yeah, so here's how psychological safety leads to performance, according to Amy Edmondson from Harvard and her work. Psychological safety creates a learning environment, which in turn drives the performance. And how does that happen? It starts first with the realization that you can be you in a group, and the idea of balancing that uniqueness and belonging. And when you feel respected, you feel safe to share your ideas and your concerns. And the ability to share creates a learning environment. People aren't afraid to take risks because they know they'll have the respect of their colleagues, even if they make mistakes. Rather than being driven just by performance in the finish line, they're driven by incremental growth and learning that they can achieve. And in that environment of seeing regular progress and new ideas being created, you begin to gain confidence in the task at hand. And that, of course, leads to performance improvements and inspires us to collaborate more with others, to be creative, and to turn those creative ideas into innovative opportunities. And it challenges us to engage others and be resilient when things aren't going so smoothly, and ultimately be more productive and profitable overall. We want to drill down on that idea of creating a learning environment just for a bit with another exercise that I think you're really going to enjoy. And for this, you're going to need a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil. So grab those now. Grab a piece of paper and grab a pen or a pencil. And here's what I want you to do. On a piece of paper, I want you to take the next 2 minutes to draw a self-portrait. Amber and I will do the same, and then we'll show you our finished drawings. You're lucky. You don't have to share your drawing with the rest of the group, but Amber and I will. And we know that you're probably not a professional artist, but don't worry about that. Just spend the next 2 minutes doing the best you can to draw a self-portrait from your memory. Your time starts right now. All right, it looks like time is up. Amber, you want to share your self-portrait?
Sure. I don't know that it looks like me, but you can tell it's a human.
Hey, that's not bad. Pretty good artist. I'm impressed. There's mine, and I don't know if you can see that, but it's got receding hairlines, squinty eyes, and great big ears, because those are 3 characteristics that I know are true about myself and have been told by many people, but obviously it's not much of a work of art. Just to transition over to this whole notion of learning orientation, we can't see your portraits, but we suspect they look probably something like this, or like the ones that Amber and I created. Pretty rudimentary, pretty basic, not that great in terms of the artistic capability. But now check out these self-portraits. So much better, right? I mean, you can imagine what these people actually look like. The artists maybe aren't Michelangelo, but they have some talent, much better than I could do. If you look at these, you feel like you could pick these people out of a lineup because they genuinely look like human beings. But now, what if I told you that these drawings were made by the same people that made the previous set of drawings? The image on the left was drawn before, and the image on the right was drawn after a few days of art training. That's what it took to move from those rudimentary sketches to a really fine self-portrait. And what that means is that it's very likely that you and I could draw that well too, with just a little bit of training. And yet very few of us think that we are people with artistic capability. And that's the potential for learning. Now you're probably asking, well, what does this have to do with high-performing teams? And the point we want to make here is that high-performing teams create psychological safety and then transform it into learning. And the learning orientation, which is drawn from Edmondson's research, and growth mindset, which is drawn from the research of Stanford's Carol Dweck, are tools high-performance teams use to solve problems when there's not a playbook. And I want to share an example of that from Edmondson's research. Not long ago, a new cardiac surgery process was developed, and Edmondson tracked its implementation in 4 hospitals. And 2 of the hospitals succeeded in implementing the new procedure, while 2 did not succeed. It didn't matter what the resources were that they had, or the expertise that they had, or the track record of innovation that they had. The difference was made by how the project was framed by the project leader. And there were 4 factors that were important. The first was that the project leader, in this case the surgeon, needed to see him or herself and be seen as an interdependent partner, not an infallible authority. The surgeon needed to clearly express his or her ability to make mistakes if others did not contribute. And then he or she needed to open the door for those contributions, often by not speaking first and letting other people share their ideas. And that sort of hints at the second factor, which is that the team needed to be seen as empowered partners, not just support staff. The good ideas, the most important contributions, can come from anywhere. And third, mistakes and challenges were to be expected, because learning is sometimes hard, and the teams that succeeded knew that it would take time to master the new procedures, and that real work would be required. And then fourth, the project's purpose needs to be communicated as a worthy goal, something aspirational. In this case, better health outcomes for patients, not just giving the hospital a strategic financial advantage. So you can see how the learning orientation worked in that context. But before we move on to the next slide, just pause a second to reread those 4 points and ask yourself, does my team operate this way? Do we know why our work is meaningful and aspirational? Do we welcome mistakes and challenges because they represent that learning is occurring? Does everyone feel empowered to give their ideas and safe to share their ideas? And as a leader, am I acting as an interdependent partner rather than an instruction giver? Interesting questions to ask yourself on a day-to-day basis as you're thinking about your own leadership and your own teams. Now we'd like to move on to point number 2 around how to build great high-performing teams. And for that, I'll turn it back over to you, Amber.
Terrific. We've spent a long time on point number 1, psychological safety. We'll move a little faster here, but with the points that are just as important. And so our number 2 insight for having a high-performing team is to define clear purpose, goals, and performance standards. And let me just say a word or 2 about each one of those. So purpose. purpose is a central self-organizing aim that organizes and stimulates goals, manages behaviors, and provides a sense of meaning for you as an individual or for the organization overall. If you came to our December session, you remember hearing us speak about McDonald's and their purpose, the fast food chain, and their purpose is to be their customers' favorite place to eat. That's their purpose. And then you can see how that might stimulate goals. It might help you choose from among different behavior options. Another example, if you're familiar with the drugstore chain CVS, their purpose is to help people on a path to better health. And so you can see how that's inspiring. It gives you a sense of meaning, and again, it helps you set goals and manage behaviors. In the case of CVS, they determined their purpose, and then they realized they couldn't, without that purpose of helping people on a path to better health, if they continued selling cigarettes and other tobacco products. And so as a result, they decided to get rid of all the tobacco products in their stores. So again, that purpose really helps manage their behaviors and stimulate new goals. It should also help you set goals, which is our next slide. When you have a clear purpose, it really inspires strategies. So McDonald's wants to be its customer's favorite place to buy coffee. All the customers started going to Starbucks instead, so they knew they had to adapt and find a new strategy to keep pushing towards their purpose. And that's what led to the development of the McCafe line of beverages. And then, so that became their strategy, then they could tie that to specific goals. Goals are how you know you're getting closer to your purpose and when you're making progress along the way. And they're always measurable, and they always have a specific time frame attached to them. So it's things like gross sales by 15% in the next year, or double the number of locations in 5 years. Jim and I have been working with one multi-plant manufacturing company that has a goal around improving their on-time delivery for customers. It had fallen to around 60%. And so they've set a goal to get them to 95%. And that goal is too big to go from 60% to 95%. That goal is too big to get there just by working a little harder. They've got to really change the way they work overall. Now, they're clear on their purpose, which is to be more reliable for their customers. And they know they've got to change the way. So they set a strategy of moving to lean manufacturing. And then they gave everybody a goal that helped contribute to that larger 95% goal. It's been a year since they set that goal, and they've consistently started delivering performances around 88%. So from 60% to 88%, and I talked to them right before Christmas, and they assured me that by February, they're going to be regularly hitting that 95%. So as a high-performing team, they set a goal, and they're pushing toward it. But there's one more thing, and that's this idea of high-performance standards. In addition to a purpose and goals, you've got to have high-performance standards. Your performance standards are your expectations for quality or for the performance level that you want the work to be done at. So it doesn't really matter if you're hitting a 95% on-time delivery, if your customers are getting the products on time, if when they take that product out of the box, only half of the time it works, right? You've got to actually be committed to excellence and deliver a high-quality product, a high-quality end result. Okay, so that probably seems really obvious. That's a no-brainer. It's a basic of business that you want to deliver on what you say you're going to. But Jim and I actually find that that's something teams struggle with in the day-to-day. And the reason why is because people get comfortable. We figure out something that works, and then we just keep doing it over and over again, and assuming that what worked today will still work in 10 years. But when we do that, we ignore the fact that the market is changing and that our competitors are developing and our customers are getting smarter, and that what seemed fresh 5 years ago is looking a little stale today. And so high-performing teams learn to keep pushing themselves to take it up a notch over and over and over again. If you work in a big company, maybe you might be able to look out across the various divisions and teams and point to one that really meets this idea of being driven by excellence and having high-performance standards and pushing to take it up a notch. I don't know about you, but when I've seen those teams, they walk in the room with a healthy bit of swagger to them because they feel like they're firing on all cylinders. Their team really feels distinctive because of that commitment to high-performance standards. And one of the things that's often happening on these powerful teams is that the team is learning to recognize and leverage strengths. So Jim, introduce us to that concept.
Yeah, so this is really the third thing we wanted to talk about in terms of what delivers high-performing teams. and that is this idea of leveraging strengths. And much of this work comes from Marcus Buckingham and Tom Rath and the Gallup organization that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And they've done about 30 years of research on this. If you haven't taken the Strengths Finder instrument to sort of discover your own strengths, I really recommend that you do that. It's very powerful. There's a book out there called Strength-Based Leadership, and it's got a little key in there that can give you a link to take the instrument and discover your strengths. I'd encourage it. Let me just tell you a little bit about strengths. When we talk about them, we're talking about things that you do really well, the talents that you have, the knowledge you possess, the skills you develop, the character you bring to a situation, the mindset with which you approach your work. And as leaders of the strength-based movement have said, the most effective leaders are the ones who figure out how best to use what they already have. That is to say, how best to use the strengths that they have that are virtually innate. In other words, when you learn to take what you're good at and really leverage it to get your work done, you'll find it easier to do, you'll be more productive, you'll be more successful, and you'll be more joyful and happy at work. And in teams, we can help people identify their strengths so that they can learn to leverage them for a high performance, and also combine them with the strengths of others on the team to help the team be more than the sum of its parts. And research from the Gallup organization has found that when you get to use your strengths at work every day, as I mentioned before, you're more productive, more successful, and there is more turnover in your organizations. And even customers are more satisfied when they're working with a team who's alive and who is using their strengths every day. On this next slide, you'll see some examples of strengths, and we've just listed a few. In the Gallup work, they identify 34 different signature strengths, and we just wanted to list some of them that we think are particularly important for high-performing teams. We see people who are gifted at strategic thinking in high-performing teams, some who possess true empathy for their colleagues or who are great at including other members on the team, or people who bring a sense of competition that pushes the group or the team towards those high-performance standards that Amber was just talking about. And some of you probably even have the strength of woo, which is short for winning others over. You love relationships. You love networking with people. You love bringing in new ideas to your team to help make it successful. And when you work as a team, you can think about the strengths each team member brings to a project and position them to work in a way that leverages those strengths. So they're giving their best and they're enjoying it while they give it. We almost find that when we're working within our strengths, work feels easier and more enjoyable. And this is important because sometimes the work we do, obviously, is very difficult. And if we can find a way to bring our strengths to a difficult task, we advance more quickly. Now I want you to take a moment to do another short activity. And this is it. I want to give you 1 minute to identify someone you work with, perhaps someone who reports to you, and grab a piece of paper and a pen, and in the next minute, we want you to write a list of every strength you can think of for that person that you identified. So for example, I work regularly with Amber, and a few of her strengths are, number one, she's got incredibly high integrity. She's honest in everything that she does. Number two, she's very productive in terms of getting work done. Number three, she's highly empathetic and a great team member. And I can go on, but just create a list of all of the strengths that you see in the person that you are thinking of. So we'll give you 1 minute to do that.
That minute went fast.
Yeah. All right. So I'm sure you've got your list. And now that you have it, think about how you could share this with the person you identify. Next time, for example, you compliment their work, instead of just saying, good job in a general way, be more specific about the specific strengths and qualities that you see in them that allowed them to do a great job. Some of the items you just listed. And then we also challenge you to share this with others in your organization. Since we're in the first month of 2020, make a list of every member of your team. And without them knowing it, begin to name and label their strengths in regular conversations with them. And watch how your team grows this year. We'll guarantee you that it will bring tremendous impact to your team and its performance. I just want to share a little bit of the research around strengths and why it's so important. And this is some work done by a colleague of ours, Emily Heafy. And she and a colleague studied existing teams in a financial services organization, and they recorded the meetings of these teams and then coded the dialogue in those teams. And they found an incredible difference between high and low performing teams. And what you see there on the screen is that the high performing teams had about a 5 or 6 to 1 positive to negative dialogue ratio. That is to say, for every concern or criticism or negative thing that was discussed, there were at least 5 to 6 positives, where they were talking about strengths, where they were talking about capabilities, where they were talking about potentials and ideas and possibilities for the future. Whereas the medium performing teams had about a 2 to 1 positive to negative dialogue ratio. So they still were more positive than negative, but not as highly skewed towards the positive high-performing teams. And the low-performing teams had more negative comments about the present and the future than they did positive. And there's lots of other research that shows the exact same kinds of ratios. John and Julie Gottman do research at the University of Washington around relationships, and they find the same thing there, that partners, couples, marriages that stay together over the long term have about a 5 to 1 positive to negative dialogue ratio in those relationships. So that's free advice. If you're in a relationship, try to keep the focus on strengths, capacities, capabilities, what you appreciate, gratitude, and possibilities for the future. Now, on to the next slide. The other thing that they found was that the high-performing teams also had a really good balance of advocacy and inquiry. That is to say, advocacy is when you're declaring something, saying something, asserting something, and inquiry is when you're asking questions. And what they found is that the high-performing teams had about a 1-to-1 balance of asking questions and making assertions. That's interesting, isn't it? So they're really in a learning mode. They're asking questions about how can we do this better? What do you think? What's your perspective, and so forth? A real balance of advocacy and inquiry. And you can see the medium performing teams had more advocacy than inquiry, and the low performing teams were about a 20 to 1 ratio in favor of advocacy, telling people what to do, what to think, rather than asking questions. So those are two things that are key for high-performing teams as it relates to strengths. Understand the strengths of each person, combine the strengths of each person, leverage those strengths, and ask positive questions so that you can maintain that positive to negative dialogue ratio, at least a 5 to 1 positive to negative dialogue ratio in your team meetings and interactions. There are a couple of resources on this next slide that I'd like to share with you that can help you with this. We've got Amber and I have a Forbes.com column, and we have one article on there called 5 Questions You Can Ask Instead of How Are You? That gives you questions that you can use in the context of your teams to create that 5 to 1 positive to negative dialogue ratio. And then we've got an ebook on our website, free for you if you'd like it. 6 questions that can lift your leadership, shape your strategy, and transform your organization. And we encourage you to take a look at that. Amber, let me turn it over to you for our 4th characteristic of high-performing teams.
So our third insight was to leverage strengths, and it goes hand in hand with this fourth insight, which is to develop team members. And perhaps you can already connect the dots about how those two ideas fit together. But when we help people recognize their strengths and when we ask them questions to make sure we understand their perspective, we're actually helping to develop a stronger team. But truly developing team members actually takes real intentionality. And so we want to say a word or two about why that matters. And these are two ideas we want you to retain. The first is that teams are a container for the development of leaders. So that's a mind shift, that your team isn't there just to get the work done, but they're also there. Your team exists for the purpose of developing one another. And then the second point, that high-performing teams are aware of and invested in developing each other's strengths. In fact, Katzenbach and Smith, who are sort of the global gurus around team development, they say that that's the primary difference between a good team and a great team. A great team is 100% developed or 100% focused on developing each other's strengths. I'm not just there for my own development, but I'm actually deeply invested in the development of my teammates. That's a characteristic of high-performing teams. So you got to double down on developing each other's strengths. You have to believe that's a reason that your team exists, to help you and your colleagues grow and develop. And another resource we'd love to share with you is this document we call the Appreciative Leadership Check-In. And what it is a way of using those meetings that you have regularly with your direct reports or with your teams, whether on a weekly or a monthly basis, to really check in and develop a mindset that's focused on learning and celebrates strengths and accomplishments and asks questions about how you can support and help develop one another. It starts by identifying wins that have occurred since the last time you met, so you can really celebrate each other. And then it follows by talking about what new opportunities are on the horizon. And then it gives you a place to sort of catalog how you're using your time, which is an important part of prioritizing to make sure your focus is going where you want it. And then for each of those priority areas, you identify what you've accomplished and what you plan to accomplish before you meet the next time, and what resources you need to exceed, including what you need from the other people on the team. And you can see how that contributes to this interdependence of partners that Jim was talking about as part of that learning approach. You're taking time to really recognize everything you've already learned and accomplished, and then identifying what you want to do before you next meet again. It's really a great tool, and in fact, there's more content on the second page we aren't going to cover here. But if you haven't already, please make sure you use the chat function to leave us your email address, and we'll send you out a copy of this as well as links to the resources Jim mentioned earlier. And then I also want to just make this point, that once you've really developed leaders, you want to keep them over time. And part of the way we do that is investing in them. There's actually a growing body of research that talks about how retaining teams over time and this idea of maturity helps teams perform better. Jim was talking about surgeons earlier. When we're looking at how well a surgeon performs a specific surgery, they actually do just as well. A mature senior surgeon actually does just about as well as a novice surgeon, which is a little bit alarming. The difference is if that surgeon's been at the hospital for more than 5 years, they always do better than the novice. So it's not about the surgeon. It's about the seniority, the maturity of that team together. We also see that in product development teams, it takes about 2 to 4 years for that team to actually reach, from a research-based perspective, for that team to reach the point where they are gelling together and working at their highest capacity. And there's another data set that looks at financial analysts who are considered rock stars at one company. And if they leave and go to another company, it takes them 5 years to get back to the point of being that rock star, unless they take their whole team with them. Then they hit the ground running. So again, there's something to this idea of retaining talent over time. If you aren't keeping your people, if you're not letting your team sort of season together, you're probably missing out on some performance benefits. So if you are looking for a team, leading a team, and you want to help them grow and develop your people, we think this final insight should help. Oh, I almost forgot to read you these questions. I'm so sorry. This is some questions we want you to challenge yourself by asking. And we think these are important because it helps you put the focus on growth in your organization. So first, is everyone on your team there to grow? Are there people who aren't there to grow? Are there ways you can help motivate them? Next, are you, as the leader of that team, expecting to learn and grow this year? Are you looking for opportunities to learn and grow, both inside your organization and outside resources to help you grow? And third, are you intentionally making growth possible for others? We challenge you to ask yourself those questions and answer them in the coming weeks. Now, Jim, our fifth insight.
The fifth insight is to share leadership. That will lead to high-performing teams. The idea is that leadership doesn't just cascade down from the top. It should flow from side to side and from the bottom up as well, because each of us have unique strengths that we can bring to the puzzle, and we have unique training that we can bring to the puzzle. And as a leader, if you allow different members of the team to lead at different times and in different ways, you'll get a much more high-performing team. You could jump down to the next slide, Amber. And here are some ways that we recommend, based on our own research and others' research, for doing that sharing leadership in your teams. The first and foremost is to do the previous four things that we talked about: build psychological safety, define clear purpose, goals, and standards, leverage strengths, and develop team members. When you've got clear goals and purpose, goals, and standards, when you've got a context of psychological safety, when you've got team members knowing their strengths, understanding their strengths, and bringing their strengths, and they are developing, then you can begin to share leadership in very powerful ways. Another way to do it, of course, is to rotate leadership based on expertise or time. For example, if you're working on designing and launching a new product, you can let the engineers lead in the design process in consultation with marketing. And then as you move into the launch process, you switch to the leadership to be held by marketing in consultation with engineering. By formally rotating who leads, you can build a culture and context of shared leadership. A third idea is to take regularly occurring events like your staff meetings or other things like that and invite different team members to lead each month. Final suggestion for sharing leadership is to make sure that each team member knows they have the autonomy to make decisions within their area of authority and responsibility. We have a group colleague or an organization that we've worked with called Tasty Catering. They do catering throughout the Chicagoland area, and they give their college-age staff who oversee catered events the authority to offer refunds or additional services in order to provide exceptional events for their clients. So often the clients are really surprised at the autonomy the young staff members are given, but Tasty Catering trusts them and allows them to provide that leadership to make sure that they're within their area of responsibility and authority to make sure that their service is exceptional. So with that, Amber, let me turn it back over to you to wrap us up.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody, for hanging with us today. We hope that these 5 insights have actually given you some really tangible ideas you can take back to work as soon as you hang up from this call. And as we wrap up, I just want to share a couple of other opportunities we have for learning together in the coming weeks. First of all, our next free online session will be April 16th. And the web address there to RSVP is there on the screen. It's called Giving Feedback That Gets Heard and Delivers Results. We know it is sometimes hard to give good feedback, but we can help you find ways that defeat defensiveness so that you can get your message heard and get the results that you want. And we'd love to share some of our suggestions and experiences with it if you'll join us on April 16th. We also have the PhD program for senior executives that we mentioned earlier. Applications begin to be accepted for the next cohort in April, and we would love for you to consider the program. You can learn more on our website, cvdl.ben.edu/doctorate, or just drop me an email. I'll be glad to send you an information packet. And last, coming up in February, we have a 3-day workshop for people that really love to learn. We'd love for you to come join us for leading collaborative change and building agile organizations. This is a hands-on workshop that uses the appreciative inquiry approach to help you think about how to bring strategic change to your organization in a way that engages every member of the team. And then if you're interested, you can go on and add a capstone project and workshop to earn your certificate in appreciative inquiry. And with that, I think we are done for today. I hope that you have found some insights you can take to work with you, and we hope that 2020 is your best year yet. We look forward to seeing you again in April, if not sooner. Have a great day, everybody.
See you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.